Shalom Aleichem, everyone. It is so nice to be able to learn with everyone this evening. Okay. Let's over here. Perfect. Okay, it is a very big success to be able to learn with everyone this evening. Obviously, the Gardin-Mermelstein Chodesh of Inspiration is generously sponsored by my aunt and uncle Stacy and Dr. Julius Gardin, Rabbi Dr. Julius Gardin, to honor the memories of their parents. My grandparents, Rav Avram ben Arav Mordechai Gardin Zichronot Livracha, and Toiva Bas Harav Yehuda Gardin Zichronot Livracha, and Meir ben Shlomo Mermelstein Zichronot Livracha, and Leah Bas Zacharia Schreiber Zichronot Livracha. May their neshamos all have an aliyah. One of the things about Yom HaKippurim is the Mishnah Berurah already writes this down, that Kippurim is specifically Blashon Rabim. It's in plural because it's not just a day of atonement dafka for the people who are living in Olam Hazeh, but also it's a day of connection for us with the people in Olam Haba. It's a day of atonement for everyone. So it's really multiple neshamos. All of our neshamos are really receiving an aliyah. So hopefully our limud today will be a tremendous chus for them as well. The topic of tonight is going to be primarily based off of the concept of Zichronos. I know that last week we learned about Malchios. This week we're going to be learning about Zichronos, the second paragraph or the second really section of the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. Actually, I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking with a friend of mine, and unfortunately, he let his passport expire. So he was telling me about all the stuff he had to do. He had to run around and do all the paperwork and everything and figure out how to expedite the process. And I looked at him and I said, your grandparents are definitely from America. There's no way that your grandparents are from Europe. He said, yeah, how do you know? I said, because my grandparents are from Europe. My bags are packed. My passport has been ready for years. Like we are all ready to go. And this really has to do with something called intergenerational trauma. Dr. van der Kolk, many psychologists and psychiatrists have really written about the topic, where we receive various tendencies from previous generations, both positive tendencies and also perhaps other tendencies. We'll leave it at that. And people who have grandparents who, unfortunately, Rahman al-Sam, went through the Holocaust. I'm sure many of you can actually understand, and you've probably spoken with various people who have gone through similar occurrences and similar circumstances and have similar traits or skills, honestly. And it works both l'tov and l'ra, because on the one hand, we receive all those tendencies, but also within our tradition, we also understand that we receive their merits. That grandparents, great-grandparents, avos, imahos, that because of all that they have built and accomplished in their own lives, all of the merits that they've accumulated and accrued, according to our tradition, we are also able to tap into those merits. We are also able to tap into those that rich tapestry of mitzvos and ma'asim tovim that they were able to accomplish. And it's specifically that we invoke on Rosh Hashanah, on the Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to remember our positive things, but we also ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to recall the positive traits of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, our ancestors, and we're going to be discussing this evening. The Gemara Mesechus Yuman, source 1 on Daf Pei Zayin, says this very, very clearly. Ashreyam latzadikim, that tzadikim, the righteous, are privileged, they are lucky, they are great. Lo dayan shein zochin. It's not enough that they have merits themselves, that they have done good things and accrued merits themselves, but ela shemizakin livneim v'livnei b'neim ad sof kol hadoros. When we think about all that our grandparents, that our ancestors have gone through, all the mitzvos that they have done, we are receiving the zchuyos, we are receiving benefits, the benefits of all that they have done in life, of their mesiras nefesh. And the Gemara says this extends ad sof kol hadoros in perpetuity, forever, until the end of the world, until the end of time. We'll be able to tap into those merits. And once again, as I mentioned before, if you look through Zichronos, we find that this is a common theme. We start off at the beginning of Zichronos in source 2. I took specific excerpts from Zichronos. I didn't put everything on the Mar Makomo sheet for obvious reasons, but also because I didn't want to break the copy machine. But ultimately, we see that it starts off Ata Zocher Masei Olam Ufoket Kol Yitzurei Kedem in source 2. Kadosh Baruch Hu, you remember all the actions of the world. You remember everything. There's nothing you don't remember. L'fanecha niklu kol ta'alumos. Everything is revealed before you. All the hidden, the mysteries are revealed before you, etc. He says, Ki ein shicha lefnei chisei kvodecha. We say there's nothing hidden. There's nothing that is forgotten before your kisei kvodecha, before your throne, etc. And then we list psukim, and we list psukim from various areas of Tanakh. If you look through the bullet points, I included some of them. If you skip to the first bullet point, we say Vayiskor Elokim es Noach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will remember Noah. And then we reference in the second bullet point, V'nemar vayishma Elokim es nakasam. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard the screams. Vayiskor Elokim es briso, and he remembered his covenants as Avram, as Yitzchak, as Yaakov. He remembers our ancestors. He remembers our forefathers. And then we find also, we read this recently, V'nemar v'zacharti es brisi Yaakov, v'af es brisi Yitzchak, v'af es brisi Abraham eskor, v'aretz eskor. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, and I will remember my covenant that I made with Yaakov, and also the covenant that I made with Yitzchak, and with Avram, and I will remember the land. All of these things we are trying to invoke on Judgment Day, on Yom HaDin. We ask Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not just us. Remember the avos. If we aren't worthy, remember the avos. Remember what our grandparents did, what our ancestors did, going back to the beginning of time. Remember them. And finally, if you skip to the bottom of the page of page 1, we speak about V'kaim lanu Hashem Elokeinu es hadavar shivtachtanu b'sorasecha. We ask Hashem to please fulfill this guarantee that He made in your Torah. And then we list the psukim. And Hashem says, and I will remember the bris that I made with those who came before you, with your ancestors. I took them out of Mitzrayim in front of everyone else. This is not just starting now. These zchuyos are not just starting now. Remember them. And finally, Zichronos ends off with the well-known bracha when we say, Ki zocher kol hanishkachos, Hashem, you remember all that was forgotten. Nothing's forgotten before you. We ask Hashem to dafka remember the Akedah of Yitzchak today. Remember and bring us mercy. Remember your mercy. Remember your rachmanos. Think about all that our ancestors have gone through, and I'm sure everyone can really just copy and paste. Every single person in this room, I'm sure, has stories, either of our own relatives, of our own ancestors, or people who you know, of books who you've read. Meaning our history is just filled with Mesiras Nefesh, and you don't have to look back too far. Even in today's day and age, just reading the stories which are coming out of Eretz Yisrael, people who are Mosar Nefesh day in and day out for Am Yisrael, these are the skuyos that we dafka try and recall, that we summon, that we show before Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem. On Yom HaDin, it's not just about us. On Yom HaDin, we're bringing everything in our arsenal. We're going back to the beginning of time. Remember the skuyos. Remember the schus of our ancestors. And if I were to say that this is just a Rosh Hashanah situation and just a Rosh Hashanah shtick, something that we employ on Rosh Hashanah on Yom HaDin, that would be false. When else do we employ schus avos? When else do we utilize schus avos? When we speak about the merit of our ancestors, every single time we start Shmon Esrei, at least 3 times a day, every single day. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Excuse me, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avoseinu. Excuse me, Elokei Abraham, Elokei Yitzchak, v'Elokei Yaakov. We start off talking about Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, how Hashem is the God not just of us, not just our God, but the God of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's actually interesting. The Rav, and this is quoted by Rav Schachter many times. Many times in his Sfarim and in his drashos, he speaks about that it's vital, it's imperative for us to start off speaking about the avos when we daven, because who would have the audacity to walk up before the Borei Olam, the King of Kings, and to say, I want you to change your mind. I need something. I need something from you. I'm minuscule me. I'm less than dirt. And I walk up to the King of Kings, to the Borei Olam, and I say, do something for me. That would be the utmost chutzpah. That would be horrific. I can't even imagine doing such a thing if it weren't for the fact that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did it before us. Says Rav Soloveitchik, in a certain sense, we start off invoking the merit and invoking the names of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to serve as a precedent, to say, I couldn't start this on my own. I couldn't start davening to God on my own, but I know that I've got history, and my ancestors did it before me, and because of them, I'm able to do something so audacious. I'm able to do something so incredulous, so crazy, as walking up before the Borei Olam and demanding that he change his mind, that he do something for me. It didn't just start with us. It started with the avos. We speak about Zohar Chastei Avos. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to remember the chastei avos, the chasadim, the kindness of the avos. What exactly is this referring to? That's a good question. But the Ben Ish Chai in source 4 says that we reference the avos. We reference the chesed of the avos in order to do at least two things. The third thing is Kabbalistic. Maybe we'll have some time to focus on that later. Rav Jay, we'll have a shmooze. But ultimately, he says that we recall the chastei avos in source 4, in the first bullet point. Lefi pshutan shel dvarim hu sheyizkor hachasadim shivtiach lahem es ha'avos leitiv lahem ulezaram. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to remember the chesed, the kindness that he guaranteed the avos. And he guaranteed the avos that he would also give to their children. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, remember that. That's one mahalach for chastei avos. But then the Ben Ish Chai continues, and he says, no, it's not just that. We're not just remembering Hashem's chesed. What else are we remembering in the second bullet point, in the bold? Beforehand, in the bold. V'chein kan sheyizkor hachasadim she'asu ha'avos ba'olam u'v'zchusam yirachim alinu. Hashem, remember the chastei avos. Remember the mitzvos of our ancestors. And not just about Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Remember all the kindness that they brought to the world. Remember their mesiras nefesh. Remember all that they brought to this world. And in that schos, have rachmanos on us. Once again, just a final example of where we have schos avos in a consistent manner in our daily ritual, in our Shmona Esrei, and especially when we employ this and we utilize this concept during the Yamim Noraim, when we beg HaKadosh Baruch Hu to please give our nation a year filled with peace and with goodness and only with nachas. We employ and we utilize this chos avos. But we have a little bit of a problem. And that's why the next section is titled The Problem, because it happens to be a major problem. And it's a problem brought down by many of the Rishonim, and based off of the Gemara Masach Shabbos on Daf Mem. You see, schos avos is somewhat ubiquitous. We find it all over. You can find it in many different svarim. You can find it in many areas of our liturgy. You can find it on Rosh Hashanah and nearly every single holiday. Schos avos, schos avos, schos avos. But what if I told you that schos avos doesn't actually exist anymore? That's what the Gemara seems to say. The Gemara in source 5 in the Masechah Shabbos says, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leGavriel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Gabriel, Leich v'rishom al mitzchan shel tzadikim tav shel diyo shelo yishlotu bo malachi chabala val mitzchan shel rishayim tav shel dam kedei sheyishlotu bohen malachi chabala. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Malach Gabriel, he says, I want you to paint a tuf, a letter tuf, on the foreheads of the tzadikim and on the foreheads of the rishayim. This is during Charban Bayis. This is when the destruction of the temple is occurring. And says the Gemara that this tuf is supposed to function in two manners. It's supposed to save, this tuf is supposed to save the tzadikim, and it's supposed to enable the Malachi Chabala, the destructive forces in the world, to kill and destroy the rishayim. But the question becomes, asks the Gemara in the second paragraph, Umay Shna Tuf. Why do we dafka have the letter tuf? What's the purpose of the letter tuf here? Amar Rav in the first bullet point in source 5. Tav tichya, tav tamus. Tav can stand for tichya, you shall live, and tav can also stand for tamut, and you shall die. Okay, that's quite simple. That seems to make much sense. It's a pragmatic thing. You have to mark them. But Shmuel says something else. Shmuel Amar, tuf, why? Tama schos avos. Says Shmuel, schos avos has ceased to exist. There is no longer a concept called schos avos. So we have utilized the bank. We have taken all of the schuyos out of the bank over the course of thousands of years. We've made many mistakes, unfortunately. I'm learning Malachim Bet with one of my classes, Malachim Beis, and we're just learning about all of the idolaters and about all the kings who do horrible things and then making deals with the devil. All these horrible things are happening. We have to use a lot of schuyos over the course of thousands of years. Says Shmuel, Tama schos avos, it has ceased to exist. We have utilized it. No more schos avos. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Tachon schos avos. Well, maybe, says Rabbi Yochanan, schos avos can still provide some form of mercy. But ultimately, according to Shmuel, no more schos avos. Doesn't exist anymore. And we're going to see in a moment, Rabbi Yochanan actually kind of agrees, potentially, with Shmuel. The Gemara then says, well, the Amoraim ask, when did schos avos cease to exist? When did we use it all up? When did we lose all of the merits of our ancestors? Amarav Mimos Hoshea ben Be'eri could be during Bayis Rishon, during the time of Hoshea ben Be'eri, a Navi. Ushmuel Amar Mimei Chazael, maybe during the time of Chazael, a king. Rabbi Yehoshua also during Bayis Rishon. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi Amar Mimei Eliyahu, maybe during the time of Eliyahu, a Navi. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mimei Chizkiyahu. Even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that Schos Avos seem to have, in a certain capacity, stopped. Rabbi Yochanan, the same person who said that there may be some element of Schos Avos still around, he still seems to say that it stopped during the times of Chizkiyahu. Was a good king. Unfortunately, he made some mistakes, but he was a good king. And if you turn to the next page in source 3, once again, we started off speaking about how Schos Avos is ubiquitous. We find Schos Avos utilizing the merits of our ancestors all over our tefillos, all over our rituals, every single day, 3 times a day during our Shemona Esrei. During Zichronos, we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, judge us favorably. Remember what our ancestors did. All of these examples. And then we hear the Gemara say, by the way, Schos Avos may no longer be a thing. What's it doing in our liturgy? Rashi says explicitly in source 6, She'ein od Schos la'avos, sha'achlua. We used it all up. In the bold in source 7, Aval mikan ve'elecha shlicham lo panal bris avos. Henceforth, the Kadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm no longer going to turn to the covenants of the forefathers. I'm not going to remember them anymore. We're done. No more Schos Avos. This isn't Hasidish. This is a Gemara. This is Rashi. And these are very troubling texts. Very, very troubling texts. What are we supposed to do with this? In fact, people don't even realize this, but there's a profound Avud Raham. It's also quoted by the Torah in his halachos of Shmona Esrei, explaining this very notion that we were talking about before of utilizing Schos Avos every single day. We start off Shmona Esrei referencing Chasdei Avos, says the Ben Yishchai. Remember, we're remembering the Chasadim, the good deeds that the Avos did. Hashem, remember those good deeds and therefore have Rachmanis on us. Says the Abu Dharam something incredible in source 8. The Amar in the bold, the Amar Chasdei Avos, Eitzel Hageula. Why do we say Chasdei Avos and then right afterwards Umevi Goel Livnei Bneihem? We remember the Chasadim of the Avos, and then right afterwards we say, and Hashem brings the Goel, the Redeemer, to their children. Says the Abu Raham, Kolomar Zocher Chasdei Avos Livneihem L'Go'alam. He remembers the Chasdei Avos Livneihem in order to redeem them. The Af Im Tamaz Schos Avos. Even if there's no more Schos Avos, even if there's no more merits of the forefathers, maybe Goal Livnei Bneihem. L'man Shemo Hashem Goalinu Me'olam Shemech. Says the Abu Raham, it could be that Schos Avos is no longer in the picture. But Hashem still made a separate deal. And he says, for my own sake, I will ultimately redeem you. But stop talking about Schos Avos. Stop talking about all these merits. Because it could have been used up. And we find countless Amoraim who agree that it was used up and just argue about when, at what point in Jewish history, already during Bayis Rishon, at what exact point did we use it up? But Schos Avos is out of the picture. So Rabosai, the question we have to figure out this evening, and excuse the protracted introduction, why do we have all these references to Schos Avos if it seems to be totally irrelevant and if we totally don't have access to it anymore? What's it doing here? What's it doing in our liturgy? Yom HaZikaron, what do we want Hashem to remember? Why are we asking Hashem to remember the Akedah? Why are we asking Hashem to remember all these things? It seems to be that Tama Schos Avos. It has all been used up. The Rishonim asked this question. There are at least 3 different answers. We're going to focus on one of them. But I think they're all actually really related. And maybe we can discuss this in a subsequent shir. But Tosfos on the spot in Masechah Shabbos says, in Achinami, it could be in source 9. He says in the bullet point, Omer Rabbeinu Tam, this is the suggestion of Rabbeinu Tam who asks this question, Tischos Avos Tama, Aval Bris Avos Lo Tama. It could be that we don't have access to the merits of our forefathers. But there's something separate. There's something called a brit, a covenant that God made with Am Yisrael, that he will ultimately redeem us. As Rav Dessler writes in Chilek Gimel and Michtav Eliyahu, it could be that this brit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has maintained throughout the generations, even post the time of Schos Avos, that extends to all of Am Yisrael. Maybe for the Yechidim, for the individuals, they no longer have access to this special treatment. But as a nation Hashem will make sure that we end up in the right spot. Perhaps, according to Rabbeinu Tam, that's what we're talking about. No more schos avos, no more merits. All the beautiful and individual things that they did, that's no longer something that we're able to utilize. But the brit, the covenant, the deal that Hashem made with Am Yisrael, that's still in the picture. And that's forever, that's eternal. That's what Rabbeinu Tam says. Alternatively, the Or Zarua lived in the 13th century. He writes in source 10, maybe we don't have to bifurcate. We don't have to divide the concept of schos avos and bris avos. Perhaps this just really has to do with tefillah. Maybe the schos is still present, but we have to learn how to access it. It's very beautiful. It says the Or Zarua in source 10. Perish li, Mori Arav Rabbi Yonasan Zatzal, Dani Mile, She'ena Umedes Me Atzma. What does it mean, Tamaz schos avos? There's no more schos avos? It means that we no longer have the standalone concept called schos avos that works automatically. But when we beg the Borei Olam, Hashem, I know that we are no longer deserving. I know that this may be a thing of the past, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please, we can't do this on our own. Please remember our ancestors. If we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, remember the avos, if we beg, if we daven, we can access it. It doesn't work automatically. Perhaps before Charban Bayis, it was an automatic thing, which is why, by the way, for the students of Tanakh in the room, we know that we lasted so long after making so many horrible mistakes. Hashem kept on coming back and giving us chance after chance after chance. But ultimately, schos avos, the standalone concept which happened automatically, is no longer in the picture, according to the Or Zarua. But if we daven, and this makes a lot of sense, on the Yamim, during the Yamim Noraim, on Rosh Hashanah, days which are opportune for tefillah, those are the days that we recall the schos avos, and we beg Hashem, remember what our grandparents did. Remember what our ancestors did. But finally, there's a second answer brought down in Tosfos, and this is the answer of the Ri. The Ri suggests, why do we still have all of these examples of schos avos? Why do we still utilize schos avos and recall schos avos if it seems to no longer be in the picture? Tamas schos avos. Says the Ri something very creative. Ri in source 11 in the first bullet point. Ri nira dilo pligi Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan. He says that in truth they're not arguing. There's no arguments about the existence of schos avos. Ela Shmuel tamar dilo rishayim tama, aval tzadikim lo tama. Uvetzadikim ayri Rabbi Yochanan. What's going on? According to Tosfos, according to the Ri, he says that schos avos for the Rishayim, for the wicked, done. No longer a thing. If you're wicked, I'm sorry, you don't have access to schos avos. But if you're a tzaddik, if you're righteous, then you have all the merits in the world. You have all the merits of your ancestors. Which I think really begs the question, why do tzaddikim need schos avos? I feel tzaddikim have their own merits, right? Tzaddikim are tzaddikim for a reason. We call them tzaddikim for a reason. But why dafka do the tzaddikim have access to the schos avos that the Rishayim don't? What's the difference? They don't need the schos avos. And this is what I really want to end off with. This is my thesis for this year. If you turn to the next source, source 12. In addition to being a Rebbe during the day and Rav and youth director here on the weekends, I'm also a social worker, and so I'm a little bit of a psychology nerd. I love learning about psychology and finding connections between modern psychology and how they're able to reveal very deep Torah ideas. They're just coming to terms with it now, and they're figuring out things which we've known for thousands of years. But there is an important psychological principle known as context-dependent memory. Context-dependent memory. And it makes sense for us to figure out what context-dependent memory is if we're trying to figure out what Zichronot is, which is all about memory. Context-dependent memory. And the principle is as follows. If you look in source 12, I'm just going to read part of this. The context dependency of memories typically is a subtle phenomenon. Imagine the everyday situation where you stand in the cashier's waiting line of your local supermarket. You can't remember where you parked your car in the supermarket parking lot while trying to think of it inside. But standing on this parking lot after leaving the market, you immediately recall the position of your car. This environmental context-dependent memory phenomenon received empirical evidence in Gardin and Badley's classical study, where they created two remarkably different natural environmental situations, on land and underwater. Memory for word lists learned on land was best if the lists were recalled on land. Word lists learned underwater were best recalled underwater. Lists learned on land getting recalled underwater, or lists learned underwater getting recalled on land, produced reliably worse recall. So memory performance for word lists in that case depended on the contextual match between the retrieval and the encoding situation. Recall was better if the environment of original learning had been reinstated. So I remember when I was learning about this in social work school, essentially the concept is as follows, that sometimes it's difficult for us to remember things. Everyone sometimes struggles with memory. I definitely am one of them. But if you create a situation, a context, which is similar to the original situation that you learned said thing, you are more likely to recall the memory. And one of the examples that one of my professors in social work school said, so for example, if you're studying for a test and you're a little bit tipsy, and this is not for anyone else, this is literally just for that one professor because he was a little bit interesting. He said, if you study for a test while you are tipsy, you are more likely to remember the information when you are taking the test if you are also a little bit tipsy. Okay, so once again, I do not advocate for this, and I promise, I did not experiment with that method in any way, shape, or form. But you can make a thousand different examples of this. If you learned something in a room that was formatted in a specific manner, if you want to remember the information, if you format a different room in a similar manner, you are more likely to remember that information. That's why when you are inside Cedar Market, Glad Express, wherever you are, and you forgot where you parked, but then all of us, or Costco is actually, honestly, this doesn't work for Costco. No one can find my car at Costco. That's just like, it's done. You're done. I'm sorry. It's already in Hackensack, shipped off to who knows where. But ultimately, once you walk out and then you get closer to where your car was originally parked, it pops into your head because the context of where it was encoded in your mind, that is now similar. So now you're able to retrieve that because the context is similar. And I think perhaps that is what we are trying to accomplish during the Yamim Noraim. That's what we are trying to accomplish during the Yamim Noraim. Hashem, Zchus Avos exists. But Zchus Avos exists only if we are identified as their children. If we create context in which people can understand, we have access to that. We are their children. Hashem, I want you to remember what our forefathers did. And Hashem looks at us. And he says, well, I need some help remembering. Can you jog my memory a little bit, Kiviyachol? Can you create a context in which you are now able to enable me to realize and remember that you are really their children and you therefore have access to the Zchus Avos? Are you acting like your forefathers? Are you acting like their children? Are you creating a context in which Zichronos can be remembered? Are we acting more like them? And this explains beautifully the Vayikra Rabbah in source 13. Beautiful, Peladik, Mayerdik Vayikra Rabbah. In the bold, source 13, halfway down, Rabbi Yudin Rabbi B'Shem Rabbi Brechya Amar, Imra Isa Zchus Avos Shemata, U'Zchus Imaos Shemismotata. If you see that the merit of your fathers and the merit of your mothers is dwindling, it's no longer working the way it's supposed to, life is not working out the way it's supposed to, what's the advice he gives? Lech vitafel bechasadim. Start doing some chesed. Start going out there and doing kind things for other people. Why? Who epitomized the concept of Gemilas Chasadim? The Avos. You don't have access to the Zchus Avos? Hashem says, create a context in which now I can recall. I now can understand you are indeed their children. Show me. Let me remember that during Zichronos. Start acting like them. Utilize their traits. Says the Hamik Davar in source 14. This is exactly why Sefer Bereshis is referred to as Sefer HaYashar. Why Sefer Bereshis is called Sefer HaYashar, the book in which we speak about all the Avos. Says the Netziv in his Hakdama to Bereshis in source 14. He says in the bold, in the second paragraph, that the Avos were referred to as Yesharit. They were referred to as people who are straightforward. Straight. What does that mean? Upright. Yes, it's true. The Avos were tzaddikim. They were righteous. They were and they went above and beyond. They were Hasidim. They were pious, and they loved the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and they had Yiras Shamayim. Od hayu yisharim. In addition, they were also what's called yisharim. Hainu sheisnagu im umus ha'ulam afilu uvdei alilim mechuarim. Because why are they called yisharim? Upright? Because they were menches. Because they were balei chasadim. Because even when they were interacting with the umos olam, with idolaters, people who were mechuarim, disgusting, they were disgusted by their actions. Mikol makom hayu imam be'ava v'chashu l'tovasam b'asher hayu kiyum habriya. They still interacted with them with love, and they cared for them. Avram Avinu davened for the people of Sodom, people who were the total antithesis of his lifestyle. They were Yesharim. They were people who were lovers, who cared for their neighbors, regardless of where they came from, regardless of their background, regardless of their religion. Hashem says, you want access to the chosavos? You see that's dwindling? Tamas chosavos? Start acting with chesed. And start copying them, emulating them. That's going to jog my memory. In fact, Rashi in source 15, this is very well known. It's based off of Gemara Misachas Rosh Hashanah. Says that in the bold on the bottom of source 14, after the Eigal Hazav, Moshe Rabbeinu is struggling. Bottom of source 15 is struggling. How am I able to save this nation? What should I do to save this nation who committed such a heinous atrocity? What can I do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "L'lamedcha" in the bold in the second on the bottom half. V'karazi b'shem Hashem l'fanecha l'lamedcha seder bakashas rachamim. Af im tichas chosavos. I'm going to teach you the Yud Gimel Midos Rachamim, even if there's no longer Zchos Avos, which can save them, even if it no longer exists. Even if it no longer exists, Hashem said, you want to save the Jewish people? You think that they don't have Zchos Avos? I'm going to teach you the 13 attributes of mercy. And why is this totally relevant and really echoes exactly what we were just talking about? Because if you turn to the next source, if you read the Gemara inside, Hashem doesn't just say, teach them the words. In the bold in source 16, Ya'asu lifanai keseder hazeh v'ani mochel lehem. Tell them to do these actions. Tell them to do these 13 Yud Gimel midos of Rachman. Perform them. And then I will be mochel, even if they don't have schos avos. Because what happens when you no longer have schos avos? Hashem says, act like them. Identifies their children. Be a Rahman. And this is exactly what the Reishis Chachma writes. He says that, specifically says Ya'asu. It's not just enough when we say the Yud Gimel Midos Rachamim during the Slichos over and over and over again. It's not just enough to say them. We have to internalize them, embody them, perform them. And by performing them, we are now becoming the children of the others. Children who are Zoche, who merit, who are privileged enough to receive the schos of their forefathers. I just want to end with one last brief maramakum. The Michtav Meliel, Rav Eliyahu Dessler, he actually writes that the word zchus avos, zchus can also come from the word not just merit, but rather zach, pure. He says that every single positive character trait that we have in our lives come from the avos. I'm sure that we can look at our own lives. Sometimes when we look at ourselves in the mirror and we perform introspection, we can see certain things that we do. We got that from our parents. We got that from our grandparents. These things which are zach, when we enable ourselves to perform these midos, which we inherited from our parents, says Rav Dessler, we are now creating a synapse. We are creating an eternal and a beautiful connection between us and our forefathers. How do we access chosavos? How do we get a Kadosh Baruch Hu to remember us during Zichronos and remember our ancestors? Make sure that when we walk into Shul, this Rosh Hashanah, this Yom Kippur, people are able to look at us and say, wow, that's Avram's grandson. That's Yitzchak's grandson. That's Sarah's grandchild. That's what we're trying to accomplish. We will be zocha to have a year filled with merit, filled with only good things, for all of Am Yisrael, and we will be zocha